Hello everyone, this is Melanie from Melanie B's Creative Studio and welcome back to my channel. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button while you're here so that you do not miss future videos. I have a lot planned for us for 2022 and I want to make sure you don't miss any of that information. Okay, so today is going to be a totally different kind of Schipper Sunday, and I almost don't even want to call it Schipper Sunday, even though I'm going to launch this on Sunday, and it is a Schipper painting that I'm going to use for this demonstration. Last week when I did Schipper Sunday, I mentioned that I was going to come back and use one of the brand new Schipper releases from the fall, and I was going to paint it, and I was going to address the fact that there have been a lot of people who've been talking about how the paints seem different, and they were concerned about whether Schipper had maybe used a different manufacturer for their paints. So I decided to choose one of the new kits they had sent me recently, and this is the one I chose because this one has some browns and a lot of greens, which can be streaky, and the reds and the yellows and all that. So even though when I swatched this palette, it was fabulous, I went ahead and chose this one because it does have a varying range of paints that can be transparent, translucent, streaky, and all of that. In addition, I also wanted to use a technique that one of my group members recently shared on the group. Although I've recently updated my group rules and I don't allow videos be shared on my group, I loved what he had shared, so I asked him privately if he would mind if I shared his content in a video. So that's what I'm going to do today as well. What I want to do is share his video clip in this video, show you his idea, which is genius, and use it to show you how to paint on a Schipper or even a Dimensions board and really get great coverage. Even if you do not gesso your Schipper, and I never ever gesso a Dimensions board or any other type of board paint by number, so I'm just going to go ahead and make sure I clear that up right now. I'm going to do this technique that Lucas Bennetts has shown us without a gessoed board. Okay, so we're doing this on an ungessoed surface. So that was another part of his technique that I liked because I can demonstrate this without you feeling like you have to add a surface prep to your Schipper, because a lot of people don't want to do that. It's a very specific technique, and you know, a lot of people are afraid they're going to mess up or damage their board. So this is a way to achieve really good coverage without having to be concerned with any kind of damage to your surface. So, having said all of that, let me go ahead, get out one of the panels that I'm going to work on, get my paints out, and we are going to talk about what we're going to do next. I'm going to get the tools ready that I'm going to be using. We're going to briefly talk about which tools we're going to be using, and let's move from there. I'll be right back. All right, so I went ahead and I've grabbed the paints out. I've got my canvas ready, and I'm actually going to work on the center panel a little bit. And you can see that this palette is fabulous. Like, I don't even remember there being any serious problems with this particular palette. But as we paint, sometimes we will find that we're not getting the best coverage, even if our swatch shows us that we have really good coverage. Now, I did have some translucent or transparent colors here, so 3 and 4 were the yellow that, you know, can be pretty see-through, and I want to try those colors with Lucas's method and test this out and see if I get better coverage using his method. Number 6 is one of those tricky orangey yellows as well, and Yeah, number one is a white, and it's kind of that off-white, but you know, those are ones that can be trouble. And also some of the darker ones, even though they have beautiful coverage here, those are ones that people tend to complain about as far as being streaky and all that. Now, I've brought you lots of videos about streaky paints and how to avoid them. I brought you 3 shades of gray videos and how to prime underneath and all of that. But those techniques work beautifully on canvases as well. But this particular technique that Lucas has brought us is going to work specifically for our board type of paint by numbers. So that's why I thought it was such a fabulous idea, and I wanted to make sure that I brought it to you. And so I reached out to him. I asked him if it was okay and to, you know, use his video. I'm giving him a gift card to use at Melanie B's Creative Supplies, just as a thank you to him, because he was so generous and so kind and let me use his video. So what I'm going to do right now is, while I'm getting out the tools that I need to get ready to paint, I'm going to insert his video right here. And when we come back, I'm going to have everything ready to paint and use his technique and do a little bit of my own demonstration and see what I think about his method, and maybe talk us through using Lucas Bennett's paint by number flow technique for board paintings on a Dimensions or a Schipper or any of those types of paint by number kits. So watch this. Now, wasn't that super cool and very easy? But I wanted to take his quick demonstration and put it to use to make sure that if we're watching that brief tutorial, that we can implement it ourselves. So what I have in front of me are a couple of tools that I'm going to be using. Over here, I have the round water cups that we sell at Melanie B's Creative Supplies. I have some stainless steel stirring tools, and these are also available at the supply shop. And this is a brand new 3-in-1 brush cleaning system that I just developed and have just launched. So I'm going to go ahead and put the brush scrubbing, this is step 1, into my water cup and get it submerged so it's ready for me to use for scrubbing my paintbrushes. And I'm going to get this part ready. This is going to take the place of the cosmetic wipes that I normally use. This system I have a video on, so I will be explaining it in a separate video. I also have just regular paper towels over here for wiping off my stainless steel tools after I'm using them for my paints, because I have the Flow Aid straight and some diluted Flow Aid. In the clip that I shared from Lucas, he uses either water or Flow Aid. You guys, I never use water because it can dilute the concentration of the paint pigment. So I always use Flow Aid or a diluted Flow Aid, and that is what I have in the bottles. And yes, the bottles are also for sale at the supply website, which I gave you the link for. And then I have the paints and also have my swatch guide. And the reason I have my swatch guide is because I thought I would try to pull some of the colors that I thought might give us trouble and try some of those first. And then I have the paints over here. In addition, I also have the Melanie B's custom paintbrush sets over here. I will be using more of the detail paintbrushes. So I will tell you as I'm working which ones I'm using, because I'll probably use more of the mini detail set, the ones with the spotter brushes, than any of the flats, because that's what he's using, and I think that's going to be easier to demonstrate with. So I'm going to have my 2/0, 3/0, 5/0, and 20/0 spotters on hand just in case I need those. All right, so those are the tools that I have. There'll be links for everything in the description below for you to find it. So let's try Lucas Bennett's Paint by Number Flow Technique. Okay, so I wanted to try this with something like a transparent yellow because you guys know I'm all about testing the hardest thing possible. So I'm going to go in with my stir stick. This is what I call stir stick number 1 in the supply store, and it's just got smooth ends on it. So according to Lucas's instructions, he says we want our paint to be a milky consistency. So that's what I'm going to shoot for. We all know that Schipper paints are very fluid, but you see how thick this is? And if you watched the clip that I included, this is really thick. So I'm going to, even though my canvas is underneath, and I always tell you not to do this, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to add lots of drops of straight Flow Aid from my Flow Aid bottle here into my paint. And you see how much I'm adding. We're just going to go. We're just going to do it. And I'm going to do it over my canvas and just say a little prayer. Now I'm going to take it up to what's in the lid. I'm going to stir it in here as well, because I want to mix this thick stuff up in here with what's in the bottom. And I'm going to test the consistency like he did. I'm like, oh no. Am I screwing up my Schipper paint right now? We will see. That's what this whole test is about. I don't want to mess up the integrity of my paint, you know, but I'm trusting Lucas. He's done this. He's tried it. Let me get my brush ready. I'm going to go in with my 2/0 from Melanie B's mini detail brush set into this opening right here. Now he says, get a puddle. Basically, you're going to get, ooh, I didn't mean to go that far down. Get my brush loaded like this. And basically puddle it on and just lightly touch around the outside. And you guys, this is not a technique where you're going to freak out about the lines either, because we're basically just lightly touching and leaving puddles of paint. I don't want to affect the opacity by adding too much, but this looks like it's the right consistency. It's very watery. Might have actually put too much. Here I am just automatically trying to smooth it out. I need to leave it alone. I'm actually going to puddle it back up. And I'm going to leave it like this. This is what he did. He left it. So I'm going to keep it the way he had it. And I'm leaving it alone because that's what he did. Now I'm going to let that sit. And I'm going away. I'm leaving it. I'm coming up to this number 4, and I'm going to continue this process. And I'm going to do the same thing. And we're just going to lightly touch around the outside And we're gonna make sure we keep loading it to where it's loaded on the end of the brush. And you see, like he did, just barely touching. And we're gonna reload often to where it's puddled up like it did just then, and filling it in to where it's like literally a bubbled up puddle on the top. And I'm leaving it just like that. I don't know why. This is super like oddly satisfying. I don't know why. Why do I keep going to the lid? Okay, I'm going to do this little opening here. Now, normally I'd probably go with a smaller brush. Yeah, I went over a little bit. That's okay. Line schmines. Okay. What I'm curious about is, where is this going? Where's all this paint going to go? I'm going to leave it there and let this dry. It might take 17 hours. And I'm going to do a different color. So let me test a color just that's not touching this one. Obviously, it's like watercolor. I would let this dry. I wouldn't want to do a color next to it because it would start flowing into each other. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going to close this pot away from my surface so paint doesn't splatter on my surface. Number 2 is a really creamy light color. And there are a couple right here. And let's do the same thing. Now, for those of you who might be uncomfortable, you can use diluted Flow Aid. If you're not sure about straight Flow Aid, how you feel about it, that's fine. See how thick this still is? So I'm going to definitely add diluted Flow Aid. And you see I'm adding a lot, you guys. I mean, I'm being very generous because he said milky. This might be too watery, but as long as it's not thick on the end of my stir stick, then that's the consistency I want to achieve with this. So I feel like as long as it's dripping off with the Schipper, that's what we need. Yeah, I feel like that's good. Now I'm going to get all the excess water off my brush so that all I'm getting is paint. Now, one thing I did notice just now when I'm filling in that larger space, obviously I could have used a larger round brush if I wanted to, but I did notice that I wanted to make sure that the puddle was evenly distributed. So like, I don't know if you noticed because it was in time lapse, but I wanted it to not have like little dips in it. So I filled up the paint so when it dries, it's like smooth. And I feel like that's going to give it a very beautiful finished look. You guys, this is super cool. I'm loving this. Like, I don't know why, but it's very satisfying. I know I said that already, but it's like, it's just very satisfying. Now look, not sure how that happened, but be careful because when I just closed that number 2 pot, this is why I don't want to do it over the board, because this is what can happen. So that is a good thing I closed it away from the board a second ago. I'm going to go clean up that pot. That way when I open this back up, it's not going to create a mess. All right, so I'm going to go in with this very tricky olive green that is always such a nightmare when it comes to being streaky. So I think before I add a bunch of Flow Aid and anything to it, that I'm going to test it with the normal method, and then we'll do it with Lucas's method. That way I can add a lot of Flow Aid to it and then test it. All right, so I'm going to go in with my 2/0 flat brush from the 5-piece flat brush set. I'm going to go ahead and get it rinsed. And then I'm going to get number 29. I'm just going to go in with a regular amount of Flow Aid and stir it up, mix it together like I usually do, taking the top to the bottom, getting it regular consistency. We're just going to paint it, like I said, as we normally would, to see if I notice any difference in normal paint coverage, normal paint consistency with the new kits. Okay, so I got really good coverage off of that. Now I did thin it a little bit more than I normally would have. I think I got a little carried away after watching how much Lucas put in for his method. I ended up putting a little more than I normally do, but I did get really good coverage. When I use a flat brush with what is potentially a streaky paint, I use a very light stroke. So I'm going to do this part right here. And just to see, now if I use a light stroke, it's not going to show my stroke marks as much. And that will prevent streaking as well, especially since I did not prep this surface with gesso. Light touch, so you're not wiping off what you've put down. And the reason it works is because you are not removing with pressure. And I'm going to show you what I mean. I might have to get a bigger opening. But I push so hard that I remove what I've put down. So I'm going to try to do it right here. And I'm creating a removal process and taking off the paint I put down. So you see why I'm not getting good coverage. And that might be why a lot of you are saying, hey, these paints are not covering, I'm not getting good coverage. And that might be why I don't have the problem. And it's things that I have maybe never mentioned before. And that might be why you're saying, well, what is she doing? Is she getting some better kit than I'm getting? It's not that I'm getting a better kit. I might be applying it differently because I've never mentioned that I'm doing something a little differently. And another thing, do you see this little ball of paint? Do you see that little heap? That little heap is going in the middle here. You see how I just wiped it and it took too much off? If I'm applying it lightly and smoothly, and I'm watching how much I'm applying, I'm not removing it. And when I start seeing it removing, then I'm getting more paint. I'm paying attention. When I start seeing it thinning out, I'm dipping more paint and I'm applying it, and I'm only using that light pressure. If I start seeing the paint coming off and it's getting lighter and I'm starting to see through it and it becomes streaky, then I'm applying too much pressure, and that's the difference. And I'm going way outside the line. I need to be able to see better what I'm doing. So right here where I thinned it out too much, I'm going to apply a little bit more paint, get it smooth, apply less pressure, lighten it up, and get it back where it needs to be. Otherwise, I'm going to have super streaky paint. And this is probably where a lot of you guys are getting frustrated. I think I'm seeing it right here. The paints are the same, I think, as they've always been, but you are applying too much pressure, even if you're using a flat brush, the right brush. But right here, like right here, I'm using too much pressure, not enough paint. So I'm gonna loosen my grip. Now, what I wanna do from this point is I'm gonna apply Lucas's technique, and I'm gonna fill this part in of this 29 using his method and see what I think. See if the coverage is better. And another thing, I wanna show you this. See all this paint, this pigment on the side of this pot right here? This needs to be mixed in. That's pigment. If it's stuck on the side, it's not mixed in with the binder, which is giving us, we're losing opacity here. And that's affecting our level of transparency. So all of that needs to be mixed in. So I need to take that stir stick, scoop the sides, mix it all up really well, and see if I get a better coverage. Because right here, I feel like I'm already getting better coverage just by scooping it onto my brush. And I'm, you know, that seems to help. All right, so once I start running out of paint, I start seeing a thinner coverage. I need more paint. But I'm gonna get my other paintbrush, my spotter, and go back to using Lucas's method. And I'm gonna add a lot of fluid. Now I added a lot to begin with, so I'm not gonna go ham and add tons, but that's about as much as I'm gonna do right there. And then I'm gonna scrape the sides and stir it in. Now I don't want to lose what's on the end of this stir stick, so I'm going to scoop it here, but all of this is going to go down in here in a second. I'm just going to do it off camera so I don't spill it on my surface. All right, now let's check my consistency. Yeah, it looks like it's thin enough. Now instead of wiping it off in the lid, I'm going to take my paintbrush so I don't waste it and kind of use it to scoop it off. And whatever's left on my brush is what I'm going to use to paint with. Now, I hope it's not too big. I'm a little concerned because it's a very thin opening and I have a fairly large brush. So I'm going to try to be careful, and I'm actually going to try to pull it so that I'm not getting it too thick to where it goes outside the lines. And here I am doing exactly what I'm not supposed to be doing. You get in a zone, don't you? You get in a habit. So back to his method and not my method. Just dropping it in. I'm supposed to be just dropping it in, Melanie, not filling it in, dropping it in. So I'm going to drop it in. Light touch. It's just a little harder. I got a bigger brush, so I'm going to switch to a small brush here. So in the meantime, while I've got this brush out, let's go into this larger area. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a smaller spotter brush, and I'm actually going to try it with the 20/0 baby brush. And let's just see how this method works in a tiny opening. And there's not a lot of tiny openings here, but this gets pretty small down in here. And I know it's not going to pick up a ton of paint. So absolutely, that would work in a very tiny area. And I want to test this in a really, really small area. So I'm going to pause everything for just a second, see if I can find a tiny area on this entire painting, because these are not super small, but I'd like to find one that's small enough to see how small we can get into. But if you've got a tiny brush like the 20/0 spotter, I think you can get into the smallest detail area that you have with this method. So I realized I started putting Flow Aid in this before I had turned the camera back on. So, that's just how I do. But I put in the same amount of Flow Aid that I've been doing, and I'm just gonna scoop out what's in here. I haven't started or anything. And we're gonna mix this in. This is just a red that I thought would be a nice one to try, but it's also a very tiny opening. So this is gonna give us an example of coverage, but also a very small opening with Lucas's method, because I'm finding it to be very easy, and especially to give us beautiful coverage with translucent and transparent paints and streaky paints. So it's going to give us a lot of different versatility along with ease of use. So especially for the Schipper and the Dimensions boards, which a lot of people don't want to gesso, as I've mentioned. So I think this is just a fabulous technique. And I am so thankful for Lucas for sharing this with me and allowing me to share it with all of you, because it is invaluable information. Now, when I go to close this pot, I'm going to have to like remove some of this because it is so full now. I just put so much in there. I'm scared. Like it's going to be super hard to close. I will have this splattering everywhere. I'm going to pull some of this out of here because there's still more pigment. So be very careful. Even if I take some of this out and put it in an empty pot, that's probably what I'll do because I don't want to waste any of this paint. It's amazing paint, but I just need to be very careful. Now, if I leave this open and paint with it for a while, I won't have to worry about that. But for right now, you know, just doing this for demonstration purposes, I'm only painting a cell or two. I'm not using a lot. So it's, you know, obviously it's going to be full when I go to close it. But be very careful. All right, so this is number 10, and I found a tiny little number 10. Now looking for it again, it's going to be like a needle in a haystack. I think it was this one. Let's test it. But I'm going to try. And we're just going to keep dipping and reloading as much as possible and covering up our line, filling in. It really is doing a great job. Even this tiny brush is holding a ton of this paint. The only problem with that was I couldn't see what the hell I was doing because I'm so far back. But I think I got it. And I'm probably way out of lines everywhere. But as far as the brush and the method, it's amazing. And yeah, I feel like this red is going to cover so beautifully. And I'm not going to be doing layer after layer. Like, yeah, I think Lucas has just saved all of us a whole lot of time, effort, energy, frustration for our Schipper board paints, for all of our board paintings. While I've got it, I'm going to go ahead and do this number 10 here because you know how addictive this is. All right, so last thing I want to do is take a look at our dried puddles. And you guys, look how beautiful and opaque that is. It dried just fabulously. I'm super impressed with this technique. I know I've said it. I want to thank Lucas. I'm going to see if it's dry. I'm terrified to touch it. Oh, it's so totally dry. Totally dry. It has a beautiful finish, like almost not three-dimensional, but it's fabulous. It really is fabulous. And this one I painted the regular method and it looks great. You know, I applied the right amount of pressure and whatever. Over here, same thing. Applying the right amount of pressure was the key, but I love the way Lucas's method worked. I didn't have to concentrate on how much pressure I was applying and all of that. So I got these same results without being too concerned about whether I'm getting streaking and whether I'm getting good opacity and all of that. So I love this method that he shared with us. Now this one up here will have to dry a little bit before we'll know, but I'm gonna just assume, and you know how we do, If this one right here that was pretty transparent, you know, to translucent to begin with, is opaque with one application, then I know this one here that was more translucent to opaque is going to be fine once it dries. So I have no issues and no worries about whether that's going to dry and be opaque. Well, you guys, I hope you love this technique as much as I did. So the final analysis, in my opinion, on the Schipper paints and whether they have changed their manufacturing or anything is I really am not seeing a difference in the kits that I've always painted with, and now I'm just, and maybe it's just because I've always applied the paint the same way, so maybe that's just me, I don't know. And maybe it's because I did so little on this one that I'm not noticing it. Now I have swatched, you know, 7 or 8 new kits lately, so I'm not really seeing a difference in the paints. And I know that using his method, it's not going to be as obvious, but even applying the paints myself with my own method, I'm just not sure. And it might just be because I always gesso my Schipper surface and I didn't paint enough on this one. It's just my method of application that is the difference. So I'm going to continue to work on the parrot piece using my method and see if I'm still not seeing a difference in the paint, because I am currently working on the Manhattan piece and I want to compare and contrast, you know, the difference in the paints versus the Manhattan piece. And so I just feel like I need to continue to work on this on my own. And I feel like that's the only way I'm going to be able to give you a true comparison. So I will do that. But you guys, I hope you have loved Lucas Bennett's paint by number flow technique, because I think it is fabulous. And when I come back another day with a dimensions kit that I had recently purchased and I haven't had time to bring to you yet, I'm going to do this again and mix the paints with his method and show you how he uses the method with the dimensions kit. So you guys be watching for that. Appreciate you being here. Don't forget to join me on Patreon. I have information in the bottom about how you can find me on Patreon, so go all the way to the bottom, find my social media and how to connect with me. Be sure to join me on the Facebook group. You guys, thank you as always for watching. I will see you back soon.